Welcome to the Robotics Through Science Fiction podcast. Today's podcast is about the HBO series Westworld, and in particular, memory and robots. We have Dr. Steve Ramirez, a professor at Boston University, who I met while we were being interviewed about the feasibility of Westworld on NPR Science Friday. Steve, welcome, and tell us about yourself and your research.
Great, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be able to chat once again. So I study neuroscience, and in particular, I study learning and memory in rodents. So a lot of our work really focuses on trying to go in and find brain cells that process discrete memories, so like a positive memory or a negative memory, and then trying to artificially turn those memories on and off to find out, one, how does memory work and what does that tell us about the brain? And then two, what happens if we can do so in animal models of psychiatric disorders? So trying to prevent the return of a traumatic experience, for instance, in a model of PTSD, or trying to boost up positive emotions in an animal model of like depression and anxiety, for instance.
Oh, so kind of like trying to suppress memories of some of the latest Star Wars movies, but boosting the positive about the original, right?
Yeah,
so,
that last one was pretty divisive, huh?
Yeah. You know, and then Patton Oswalt has that whole thing that if he had a time machine, you know, what would be the first thing he'd go back in time and stop Lucas at 93, 94. Anyway, it was a great discussion on NPR about Westworld and all of the very interesting robots there and that. And but to summarize, for those who haven't listened to the podcast on NPR, what was the one point about Westworld that you wanted to get across?
So I think the part that really resonated with me was, I guess it's twofold. One is you don't really know who's human or who's a robot until some kind of spoiler happens. And that's great, because I think that makes it so that all of them pass the Turing test, right? And then we're now here conflicted, being like, we had so much emotional investment over a human that actually ends up being a robot, or vice versa. So I think that being able to pass that Turing test and keep us on our feet over who's quote unquote real or not is great, because it means, or it challenges us to think, well, in the future, maybe we should actually apply certain moral standards, for instance, to AI if they could show that kind of humanizing capacity where we can distinguish them from humans or robots. And I think the second was how memory is portrayed and being able to access memories that were thought to be gone, for instance. So like in Dolores' character, and being able to access memories that supposedly were etch-a-sketched away, for instance, when they go back and are iterated on. But when they start creeping back in, that actually is a hot button in neuroscience right now, which is, you know, do we actually forget? Or our memory is actually dormant there, and we just actually underestimated how much the brain encodes?
Yeah, there's a whole thing in season 2 with Maeve. She has memories, and then she discovers that her daughter doesn't share the same memories. You know, the stuff has been so burnt on her in her memory, and is so major to her, but it didn't have the same impact. So she's basically saves her daughter, only to discover that her daughter really is like, who are you again? You're a creepy, intense woman who's scaring the bejesus out of me. Now, isn't memory reconstructive? I thought that we don't store everything. We kind of fill in the blanks, and that's what makes some of expert witnesses and stuff like that really kind of iffy.
Yeah, so this is the kind of stuff that gives me an existential crisis at night, because one of the things that we've learned is that, you know, in the past maybe 70 years of psychology and neuroscience, we've learned that memory isn't like a carbon copy or like an iPhone video of the past where every little detail is just accurately recollected. It is a reconstructive process, and it's something that when we recall a memory, there's this time-sensitive period, for instance, where that memory is modifiable, where it's easily susceptible to modification, to updating, to the introduction of new information. So I think that we're remarkably good at remembering the gist of things, like what I had for breakfast today, for instance, or my favorite restaurant, or things like that. But when it comes to the nitty-gritty detail, those details can warp and fade very quickly. And I think that I think memory is the thing that threads and unifies our overall sense of being, our identity. So what does that say about the fragility of our identity, for instance? And I think that that's the kind of stuff that I think it's empowering, because it just means that we're more dynamic, and I think that's a little more fun.
Well, you know, and that's the whole thing of both Blade Runner. You know, Blade Runner started out with the idea that to keep the androids from going wacko, they had to give them memories to make them think, to ground them, and make them think they were people or close enough. And then Blade Runner 2049, that relied very heavily on the idea that memories make us who we are, even if they're false memories. So do you see that different than the way they were dealing with memories in HBO Westworld, or were either more cognitively plausible?
So I think that in Blade Runner 2049, they did a fantastic job, for instance, with Kay, Ryan Gosling's character, and really seeing a person deconstruct when they find out that their past has been fabricated, essentially. So there's that scene where he goes in and is talking to the memory manipulator, and then she says to him, think about the memory you want me to see, which is pretty cool, because I'd like to think of our work as the version of that where we ask our rodents to think about the memory they want us to see. And then in this case, you see him recall the memory, and then she tells him in that case that that memory was lived by someone else. And then he freaks out, rightfully so, because it's finding out that your entire life has just not been, it's a lie, right? It hasn't been under your own control. Volition is a lie in the works. But I think that what that scene does, for instance, it's what Westworld does for 2 seasons in this case, where it does make you question what these memories mean when they resurface, again, how they're a part of your identity. And of course, what happens when you find out if one of them isn't real. I mean, it feels like your world just kind of crumbles underneath you.
Yeah, and Crumbling Worlds, that they were based on stories by Philip K. Dick, but a lot of Dick's stories were about false memories. He's got one, The Electric Ant, where a guy who is a robot discovers he's a robot, and everybody's kind of bummed he discovered it because they just like things the way they were, and so he has trouble dealing with that. Another book that's highly regarded in the A Closed and Common Orbit, part of the Wayfarer series. An AI is now stuck in a robot body, kind of a bit like, the standard thing. You saw a little bit of that in Ancillary Justice, but it's in a body, and it has a bit of a personal crisis because she can't store everything. She doesn't have infinite memory. And so will that happen to robots? And if so, how do the biological agents choose, if of all, what to remember? And would there be any advantage for robots to do it the way that people and animals do it?
Yeah. So one argument for why we don't remember everything, I don't buy the whole, our brain would just run out of room. I mean, I think we have 86 billion brain cells, and it's 100 trillion synapses, and who knows what computational power that actually means, but we know it's the kind of computational power that enables consciousness and things like that. So I think that one of the reasons in our case that we might not remember everything, it's that there's just a lot of irrelevant detail. And then one argument, for instance, is that in people with super autobiographical memories, so like Rain Man, right? Like the people that can basically remember everything, one documented impairment, for instance, is while they can remember everything, it seems to get in the way of things like creativity or things like inference and being able to translate across topics. So in that case, what we gain by not remembering everything is basically having a kind of mental sketch pad where we can iterate and combine elements of the past into something novel, which is creativity, right? In that case. So one of the things is that by not encoding everything, we encode what's important, and then we have that mental sketch pad where we can recombine elements of the past to come up with the next movie or painting or experiment or rocket launch, right? So I think that's, it's a hypothesis, but one that I'm privy to, because it makes sense that creativity is something here, for instance, that would be favored in the case of our species.
Oh, yeah. But okay, so would there be any advantage to being able to consciously decide what to keep as a discrete event and what to merge into whatever that sort of, I don't care about as much about the detail, so that can be a little fuzzy and so on? Because I don't think we do consciously get to decide what we remember. We remember stuff we don't want to and can't seem to get rid of it.
For sure. So that's the downside, is that the things that are likely to hurt us or eat us in the past, for instance, is basically what's given us this kind of, quote unquote, fear circuitry in the brain, where we remember what was likely to eat us or the poisonous thing that we ate or things like that. But now we get instances where those scenarios can be of such high trauma that those kinds of memories now become maladaptive, where you get intrusiveness, for instance, after coming back as a veteran, or you get intrusiveness after being, the victim of an assault or something like that. So you get these core symptoms of disorders like PTSD that now are basically your brain kind of began to snowball now on these negative experiences, and they continue to intrude in your mind. And that one, you're right, we don't have conscious access over preventing those from happening. It just kind of happens. Now, with regards to, what would we do, or could we actually say, I want to consciously encode this? I don't know, maybe right now we've kind of reached escape velocity from the question, because everything that I think that we need to consciously remember, I use Google Calendar, right? Like I send a quick reminder, I put a reminder on my phone. It's like we're no longer just kind of like slaves to the inadequate neural systems that we have. It's like, okay, I know for a fact I do not remember my meeting schedule for tomorrow. Like I don't, and I probably couldn't if I tried to every single day. So I just outsource it to something that's a little bit better than me at it.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever read any of Lois McMaster Bujold's books, but in the Berkowskian series, one of the characters has an eidetic chip, so he remembers everything, and he gets, and then eventually it fries, and they're able to save him and all that, but he has no memory. He's never developed any strategy for remembering everything because it was all stored on a chip. And so he's very excited when he discovers things like a memo pad and calendar programs, that he doesn't have to remember everything, that people could write stuff or, put stuff in their tablet and be done with it. So that was kind of cool. Let me change up just a little bit. So in artificial intelligence, we often represent stereotypical events or sequences with a structure that was developed by Schenck and Abelson called scripts, which is really an irony for screenwriters like Simon on Westworld, who's always like writing up scripts for the host, because that's how we really do it. Well, but how does memory play into that? How we construct our general understanding of the way things work? Like if I say he went to McDonald's and came out with a shaken burger, you just know he paid for the shaken burger because that's how it works, right?
Yeah, so I think in this case, memories, there's a couple of elements here. So it's a way of recalling the past, and given that they're modifiable, it's a way of reconstructing the past. And this is almost like nature, I guess, has a sense of humor, because the area that I study is the hippocampus, which we know is important for forming and recalling memories. It's one of the areas that Alzheimer's attacks, for instance, and we get these memory impairments. But it's ironic because the hippocampus is one of the areas that helps us recall memories. It's also active when we're modifying memories, and it's also active when we're imagining ourselves in the future. So it's almost like the same area that helps us recall the past also helps us form false memories, but also helps us imagine the future. So there seems to be this biological trade-off of, well, it has its perks of enabling the modifiability of memories, but maybe that's a feature and not a bug. Like maybe that feature is what enables things like imagining ourselves in a scenario that we've never been in. Because when somebody says, well, they went to McDonald's and got a shake, I say, I can't imagine exactly what happened, but I can imagine when I walked into McDonald's the last time that I got a shake, and I go through these scenarios of, on average, mentally what it looked like for me. And you can ask questions, well, like, what if you go and McDonald's is out of milkshakes? Then you can say, well, I've never been to a McDonald's that's been out of milkshakes, but I know what my course of action would be because I can recombine the last time when I went to a Wendy's and they were out of milkshakes. And I apply the same, I guess, series of decisions now in just a slightly different context, which I think, again, it's a good thing because it helps us interact with our environment dynamically and adaptively. So I think it's, the area that helps us reconstruct the past is the same area that helps us imagine ourselves in the future, which again, I think is a feature instead of a bug most of the times.
Yeah, I would agree. And the same thing with the computer vision, looking at the work of Coslin, on how we reuse in our visual circuits. And when we imagine things, we're actually imagining them in proportional space to their physical arrangement in real space. So we're reusing a lot of stuff. Well, we're almost out of time, and I did want to ask you, because I know you like science fiction, what's your favorite robot movie or book?
Yeah, so my favorite, I'll for a second dodge the question and then I'll answer it. my favorite robot is TARS from Interstellar, because TARS isn't this iRobot, like it can jump off of buildings and run faster than a human and punch through walls. TARS is just like this. It's just a Swiss Army knife of a machine that has a great sense of humor, and it has a sense of humor setting. So TARS is like the manifestation of, okay, we need something that can carry a person when they're stuck on this water planet, or can drive at night when we fall asleep, or guide a spaceship at night when we fall asleep, wake us up after we're in our 9-month slumber to get to Mars or past Saturn. And like, I think it's an all-purpose robot that just kind of does the things that we're not as good at as humans. And that's it. I mean, it looks like a Swiss Army knife. It doesn't have to be this elegant design. It just gets the job done in, I think, in a simplistically and elegant manner. So I think TARS is my favorite robot. In terms of favorite robot movie, I mean, The Matrix is up there because of the ideas of it. Like this idea that, you know, it's almost draconian these days that the robots are going to take over and blah, blah, blah. But that one was more of like you questioning the whole free will argument, for instance. So I think that one, based off of just the philosophy imbued in it, is definitely up there.
Yeah, when it first came out, I whispered to my husband, "Oh, it'd be so great if he was an AI agent." You know, when Agent Smith was on there, and it was like, "Oh my God, I love these guys. They got it." So, is there one general science book or a book on memory that you'd recommend for people who want to learn more? I mean, without having to go to medical school or a PhD in biology, chemistry stuff.
One of the most accessible books I've read, and it's a page turner because it's inherently comedic, but it's also talking about
on memory and
it's called Moonwalking with Einstein by Joshua Foer.
I've heard that. Okay.
It's basically so Joshua Foer basically is the journalist, and then wants to basically teach himself to be one of those people that can memorize, you know, a deck of cards or 2 decks of cards in like 2 or 3 minutes. How do people do that? And there's all of these wonderful techniques that people can use to memorize pi to the 1,000th digit, and we can do it. There's certain aspects of our memories that are very good, and we don't really take advantage of them all that much. And you know, it's called like the memory palace. That's like from the days of the Greeks, where you basically imagine a place that you know very, very well, like your house, and then the number 2 in the deck of cards might be moonwalking. The number 3 might be Einstein, and like the number 4 might be whatever. You assign a different object to each number, and ideally, the more hilarious and crude and visually stunning it is, the more it sticks. So then, if each number, for instance, has some outlandish object associated with it, and then you place those numbers along the house that you're remembering, or the memory palace. So what you do is you imagine walking through, and then you place Einstein there. You imagine walking through more, and you place moonwalking with Einstein, or you place these different objects along the palace. And then finally, you get really good at this, and after a year of training, you can read a deck of cards or 2 decks of cards, and then you place all of these objects along this palace, and you close your eyes and just walk through it. And then you say, "Oh, moonwalking with Einstein was 3, 4, 5," and like you can go through it and train yourself to do it really well. But he's pretty hilarious, and he has a great TED Talk too on this. That's a microcosm of the book. And I think along the way, even though it's something about just trying to memorize, you really learn a lot about what memory is, some of the history of memory, how we can take advantage of our memories, and then follow kind of someone's journey of trying to enhance their memory as well. So it's really, really well written.
Oh, cool. I'm going to put that on my list. Well, Steve, thank you very much for being with us today, and I hope we can talk to you more in future podcasts.
Agreed. It was a pleasure. Please count me in for some more chatting in the future.